it's 1:32 here in Réunion. I think we will start. Welcome, everybody. My name is Stéphane Jaillet. I'm very glad to have you on this third episode of our webinar series on Defense is the New Offense. Today, we'll have a different type of webinar with a panelist. And with me today, we have three people that I will introduce to you just after a few words about us. I'm the CEO of OpenSphere, and I'm glad to have Martin Potgieter, the CEO of Enclose. He's also the co-founder of Enclose, and OpenSphere and Enclose have been working together for more than 3 years now. We both are providing cybersecurity services in the Indian Ocean and South Africa. And with this webinar series, we wanted to tell you a bit more about the SOCs and the MDR services that we are providing. And today, we'll have a very interesting discussion about the different type of teams, including blue team, red team, and purple team. With us, with Martin and me, we also have Gregory, who is a consultant of OpenSphere, and is providing CISO, outsourced CISO services for our clients. And we also have Serge from, hi Serge, from Exodata Mauritius, former known as Helix Security. The webinar is recorded today, so you'll be able to replay it. And also feel free to ask questions using the chat or the Q&R report. And during the discussion, I will tell these questions to our panelists, and they will answer it during the discussion. So before the first question, let me introduce you to Martin. Hi, Martin. Could you tell us a few words about you and your experience and your career? And welcome, and I'm glad to have you today.
Thanks, Stéphane. It's good to be here. Yeah, I'm the co-founder of Enclose. I've been in cybersecurity for almost 20 years now, and I've been involved with in terms of cybersecurity. I've been involved with offensive or red team and defensive or blue team, and I've been pretty much focusing on the blue team stuff in the last couple of years. Yeah, that's just a quick summary of myself.
Thanks. Hi, Serge. You are head of SOC at Exodata Mauritius. Could you tell us a few words about you also?
Yeah, I'm coming more from a technical background and moving to management of operations, both in IT, infrastructure, and network, also security for more than 10 years now. And glad to join this discussion today with you. A very interesting topic about the teams.
Thank you, Serge. And the last, Gregory. Hello, Gregory. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you, Stéphane. Thanks for having me. I'm a 10 years IT security consultant, acting for OpenSphere as you told Stéphane, outsource Chief Information Security Officer. I'm very interested in today's subject because it's a really big challenge for all the clients in improving detection and reaction capabilities, regardless of the size of the sector of these clients. So it's an interesting subject. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So Okay, time to diving in the subject. Martin, let me ask this: how is the red team essentially? Is the red team essentially just a team doing pen testing? And if not, what's the difference between the two? And how does a red team work, according to you?
Cool, thanks for that question. I think for me, no, a red team is not a pen testing team. I think it's often confused, so that the term has become interchangeable. So we talk about red teaming, and then often people will talk about getting a pen test and then confuse the terms. Oh, we're going to do some red teaming, but it's actually a pen test. So I don't think that they're the same thing. I think pen testing has been a term that's been used for some time now. And there's probably some discussion around what exactly a pen test is. We've seen a lot of companies doing just plain vulnerability scans and calling that a pen test. And certainly that's not what it should be. But I think we can probably have another discussion just on that. So I'll focus on what I believe is the difference between pen testing and a red team. And I think the main difference is that a red team is typically more ongoing exercise, whereas a pen test is a once-off engagement. Whether it's done on a regular basis is another question. Most customers would do it once a year. Some will do it more frequently, up to once a quarter. But I think the main difference between the two is that the outcome of a red team work is to work with the organization to improve their defenses, whereas a pen test is more designed to find any gaps that there may be. And for me, in terms of a pen test description, it's really to have a pen test should really have a goal. Like the goal may be to exfiltrate data or get domain admin privileges in an organization, where a red team is constantly working to find gaps in the defenses of the organization. And I think the red team, we typically see them in-house. So although there are organizations that do outsource red teaming, where the engagement is ongoing, very similar to a bug bounty type engagement, but not just software, infrastructure and all kinds of other things that they test. But I think that bigger organizations typically will have a red team internally that do their red teaming work for them. And those organizations would not consider that part of their pen testing. I think that's a good start to start describing the differences between the two. I don't know if any of my panelists want to add anything onto that.
Yeah, one interesting point you mentioned is that the pen testing itself is often a one-shot thing. And maybe from a size or perspective, we can ask a question to Gregory, I don't know, but I often saw that we have a calendar as well for pen testing, and it is usually recommended to do it on a regular basis because infrastructure changes and else. And for now, I had a question if this is something that you recommend guys to have it done several times a year, and is it only internally or also done with a third party?
Yes. So if I were to answer that question, I'd say that that should really be done externally with a third party. You don't want to check your own work, although it's obviously difficult to do that. To do it more than once a year, I think the reason most people do it once a year is because that's been driven by compliance requirements. But your point in terms of things changing on a regular basis makes it a challenge. And in fact, even once a quarter, you probably have more changes in your environment to warrant doing it more than that, but it becomes a budgeting problem. And then that's really where I think the red team kind of crosses over, and that's where that function takes over. to have a constant checking of that. And like I said, you know, the bigger organizations will have red teams running, you know, they'll be employed actually internally. And they're doing that red teaming work all the time, trying to find defenses that are weak or gaps in the defenses. In terms of whether it's done internally or externally, I think a red team could work from externally, or, you know, we've seen scenarios where the red team will have a foothold within the network, and then they work like that to see if they can move laterally. So it could work either way, but it's probably important that you test, you know, just like a pen test, you test internal networks and external networks, so you kind of simulate what it is like to have an attacker on the network internally and externally as well.
If I can add something to your point, to Martin, from my understanding, the red teaming is also not only testing the technical part of your IT environment, but also the human part. I mean, there is many times in the, I will talk about the cybersecurity kill chain. For me, the methodology of the red teaming is to test all these modules of the cybersecurity kill chain. I mean, the reconnaissance, the weaponization, the delivery, and in the delivery, you have to test all the human part. And this is what I want to tell. It's not only testing regularly on a regular basis, I mean, the technical part, but also testing all the employees to be sure that they have, that they are aware of the risk, the company.
You mean like using social engineering?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's a good point, because that's always sometimes the pen testing will overlook that, depending on how that's scoped. But and we know that that's often a weak point for organizations. I mean, red teaming can also be even physical checks, like getting into the building. I think it can go as far as that in terms of how it's defined.
Yeah. And also, I think that pen test is one difference between pen test and red team also is that when you do a pen test, you have the information about when it will be done and who is conducting the pen test. Is that the same with a red team test? Because I think red team is lasting the whole year. I mean, or every time. So there is sometimes a kind of surprise. They try to surprise the defense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, usually you try to you have to set a time frame anyway. But yes, the different, it is not the same as the pen test is. So the attackers can arrive when they want during the time frame. I mean, by any way they will find.
So just to add to that, I mean, there's probably some debate that can be had about that, because you do get a black box penetration test where technically the attacker doesn't know anything, but there could be some definition. And we've seen organizations do this differently, where they will not, when they do a pen test, they won't tell their security teams that they're doing a pen test. But I think it's slightly different with a red team, because the red team, especially if they're insourced, you know, like Stefan says, they could be engaging the year round. So, you know, you can't expect them to say every time, and even the security manager might not know what they're up to. So even with like pure black box pen testing, it would be very, you know, not quite even the same in terms of notifying the relevant parties, and like you say, be a surprise, because that's what you want to test the defenses, you know, without bias. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that we have a first definition of the offensive part of the different teams. Now, talking about blue team, you think the blue team is made of your security engineers, like firewall engineers or antivirus engineer? And if not, what's the different skills required? How does a blue team work? Martin, what do you think? Or Serge?
I can start.
So, sorry.
Well, no problem. For me, whenever you say blue team, we think about defense, and very often I don't understand that we only involve security people or security targeted people within the company for the defense. We talk about social engineering, for example. I think the security guard itself or the person at the front desk is also part of the defense, global defense perspective. And yes, definitely the engineers is the first line, managing the firewalls and but also network people. We can work on what we block from a defense perspective, but we need also to check what we don't see or what is authorized. I mean, authorized flows or connections that we can miss. And this is why we need to involve other people in that field, I think. So I would see it as the whole thing. It's all the IT department and all stakeholders, I mean, that needs to be involved in this blue team, I mean, outside the so-called defense team.
Yeah, sorry if I can chip in here. I think that's a good point. So I guess the blue team is what you're saying is not just a single person or one or two people. It's the whole security team. That brings a bit of a light to it, because I was actually gonna say that it's not the security engineers, but you actually 100% right there. And now that I think about it a bit, they definitely part of the blue team and putting it together. But for me, the blue team, there's a little bit of a different thinking in terms of security engineers, you know, the guys that are running the firewalls and the AV engineers. And it's almost like the security, the security engineers will be guided by the security architect in terms of the policies to implement. And I think in terms of bringing another perspective to it, you know, we use a term called defense engineering, but sometimes you need to look at kind of the level of a security architect to see where your defenses sit and where there might be gaps. And where a firewall engineer or AV engineer might have a very focused view, you also need someone to provide a bigger picture of, you know, what if there's something in between the AV and the firewall where there's a gap, and you need to make sure that you have that covered. And for me, that's where, again, these are terms that we use, and they're gaining some ground in the industry, but we have detection engineers in our MDR team, and they're the kind of guys that will look at an organization as a whole and see the firewall and see the AV and be able to spot the gaps in between. And I think that's a critical part of actually of a blue team, is to find those gaps and not be so focused into one area. So I guess it's also dependent on how big an organization is. You see very large organizations, they have very specialized teams. You know, you might have a mid-sized organization that's have a firewall and a network engineer kind of crisscrossing. But as the organization gets bigger, then you have someone just working on the firewall. And so he won't have visibility of other areas of the business. And you expect the security architect and what we call the detection engineers or defense engineers to be able to put that all together and highlight those gaps where those gaps exist. And I think to Serge's point, you know, if you look at a blue team, you also need to consider social engineering. So, you know, maybe that's where the CISO would come in and provide visibility of those risks as well, where it's not really a technical risk. And maybe Gregory can comment on that, but it is still a risk in terms of the defense of the organization.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to what you said, Martin. Just a quick question for you, Martin. So what you're talking about is kind of threat hunting.
Yeah, I mean, I think threat hunting is one of the things that would be performed by the blue team. but I think more to my point, and it's kind of difficult to describe because we don't see a lot of organizations have the role of what we call detection engineers or defense engineer, defense engineers. But it's sort of like a CISO role, but more technical in terms of understanding where the gaps may lie. And I guess it's a cross between a cross between a couple of different roles, whether it be the CISO, security architects, and even the security engineers to understand where those gaps lie. I think the biggest point that I'm making here is that we can't expect a firewall engineer or AV engineer to identify defense weaknesses in an organization. We need someone else to sometimes put that together. I'm not saying that that's always the case. Sometimes you get very smart people in different roles, and then they can do those things together. But often what we've seen is that putting the picture together for the defense is something that's that there's a specific role for that.
Yeah, from my experience, what I've seen in my organizations is that the CISO was more working on the risks from a higher level, and most of the time in the IT departments there were security analysts that were working on this topic.
Yeah, that's I think I would agree with that. Where the CISO or the ISO is a high level identifying the risks. I guess maybe the question is then, when the CISO identifies the risk, who's the best person to translate that risk and understand how to mitigate it? Would you say that that's also the CISO, or is it, does it involve different people, different roles?
As you said, it depends on the size of the organization. In very small IT departments, most of the time the CISO is doing all the roles, but in bigger or more huge organization, when you have a small IT security team, there are security analysts working on that. For small IT departments, most of the time is the security architects or the infrastructure architects working with the CISO, and sometimes with the head of IT department too.
There's also a point apart from the technical aspect I want to mention is the process. One main responsibility on the blue team, from my opinion, is to manage incident response. And there is a point of the process. You can have whatever firewall you have, you can have whatever antivirus, and they need also good processes, and maybe the technical people are not the right people to work on the process themselves. We can now include the CISO, the risk managers, and also have the business views and impact, potential impact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Martin.
I heard one word there that kind of made me think about something else that is part of blue teaming, and that's part of the blue team, and that's we talk about detection and defense engineering, but I think another big aspect of the blue team is response and how response is handled, and that's that word that Serge said there now kind of brought that to the front of mind. But again, I think the emphasis there is that maybe an AV engineer would understand how to respond to like a malware or something on an endpoint. But like when you have a bigger incident, for instance, someone's doing a DDoS, okay, maybe the firewall engineer will do that. What happens when someone is attacking your web application, or maybe they successfully attacked it and they get onto your web server? Who do you give that to? You wouldn't give it to an AV engineer, and I think this is where the different skill set comes in terms of the blue team members. That they would have the expertise and the knowledge on how to deal with that in terms of a response perspective. So I like what Serge said in the beginning about the blue team being the whole IT team and security together. That's a good point, because when you have those types of incidences in a response perspective, you need everyone to come together and react in a unified fashion.
So it means that you have already seen with your clients that a blue team is not necessarily something that comes with a SOC and SIEM service or MDR service.
Yeah, no, for sure. We've seen that it doesn't come with, you know, most SOCs of yesteryear, particularly outsourced SOCs. You know, they're just looking at alerts, and you know, they're sending on alerts, and that's not really, you know, there should be some level of investigation that happens, and remediation, and that might involve different parts of you know, might involve the firewall engineer, etc. But again, you know, it's just sending alerts is not a blue team type thing, or it's not something that you would expect from the SOC of nowadays. You need more than that. You need analysis, and you need guidance in terms of response. Okay.
And so now we have seen the both sides of the teams. Do you think there is sometimes people are also talking about purple team? So is the purple team an actual team, or is it more a function? And how is what's his role between both red and blue teams?
I can start with this one if you want to. My point of view on this one is the purple team role is to facilitate the improvements between the detection and the offense, between the defense and the offense. It is an interface role between both teams. The objective is to sharpen the skill of both teams, and eventually to make spot checking for some vulnerable system or some specific risks that have been identified. This is my point of view.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with Gregory there. I guess I would see it not as, it's more of a function. It could be a role in terms of someone, you know, leading the function. But it's exactly like Gregory says, in terms of making sure that you actually benefit from both the blue team and the red team exercises that you may do. So, you know, if there is a red team and they find a gap somewhere, it's not just a matter of reporting on it. You need to work with the blue teams to discuss how that gap was found, ways on how that can be detected by the blue team. And that's really where I think them working together, hence the term purple teaming, is what that actually is. And it's really, I think, important, because if you don't work together, then you don't see you don't see your return on the investment of the red or the blue team, particularly the red team, because the red team is there to pick up the gaps. And if you don't get that feedback back to the blue team, then you're not realizing the benefit of having the red team there. In the red team there is literally to pick up the gaps and help you improve the blue team. And that would be my perspective. So, yeah.
I see it as a concept. I was searching for my deep purple t-shirt, but I didn't find it. You see, I'm really into the purple thing. So it will be Led Zeppelin today. Why a concept? Because I think when you find good people, either in blue team or red team, with different skills, or offensive skills or defense skills, if they can use the skills to find vulnerabilities, they know the mechanisms of attacks, they know how it works, and for sure they know how we can prevent that. This is what I see as purple, using maybe skills on both sides, and especially defense. This is what we put in the ethical hacker and cyber defense. This is why we learn how to break things, how to use the same tools and gain the same skills as Black Hat, is to use them for defense purpose. So I would say also on an organizational point of view, when you have a small company, a mid-sized company, maybe you can afford to have a red team, a blue team, and a purple team, and you can mix these roles. And for sure, whenever you find a vulnerability, you have to patch it and to work on the fix. I got a yes from Gregory. That's fine.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yes, you just mentioned something interesting, Serge. And my question is, with limited resources, if you are a middle-sized company or a middle-sized organization, with which team should you start? Which one should you establish first? How would you proceed?
No, I really think it depends on the security posture of the company. For sure, the budget as well. But the first thing you have to do for a company, if you do it by yourself, if you have a CISO, you have to run a business. And for sure, you are exposed to some threats and you have to defend. This is how I see it. So I'm more a defense guy than an offensive guy. So in the business context, I would say build the skills for you to defend your business. This is how I see it. And as soon as you grow, or as soon as you get, more sensitive assets, well, you will need to gain some skills that used to belong to red teams, and then you start to go for pen testing and else. But before building a red team, you can go with the third party, as mentioned previously by you guys. So my answer is very clear. I would suggest that you focus on defense, but it's a matter of skills. You will need both.
Yeah.
Okay. Go on.
Okay, let me put my 2 cents in here quickly. I think I agree with Serge on that. Initially, I would say it was a very clear answer for me that it's that you need to focus on the defense first. But I think Serge brings an interesting concept to the table. So let's say that that your security is actually quite mature for your size organization, and we've seen this in different organizations where they have, they may not have a blue team defined as such in terms of the different roles, but their security and their methodologies are so well developed and mature that they actually, I think maybe the blue team is just a natural progression of having a mature security, posture inside an organization. And in those cases, maybe it's good to start looking at a red team. But I think those are quite rare instances. And in most cases, I would agree with Serge that, yeah, the blue team is often overlooked in terms of, if you were to start, you think that your firewall engineers or your AV engineers is enough. But maybe you need to look at some of the other functions that is part of the blue team first before you start looking at a red team. And again, what Serge says is supplement, before you have a red team, I would actually maybe do some pen tests first, start doing that on an annual basis as a minimum. And then only after you've done that a few times does it make sense to set up a permanent red team. For me, a red teaming, if you have an in-sourced red team, you need to be fairly mature in terms of how you're working. And we've seen organizations that have, one person internal red team, but you start to I think it's difficult because often the roles are mixed. So that person may be red team, but you know, he's so close working with the other teams that he doesn't have that third eye perspective. And that's why it's also important to do pen testing, because you know, it's like we said in the beginning of the webinar, that it's those are different functions. So if you have a red team, you still need to do pen testing because you need that third eye perspective, that third party to actually look. You know, the red team might know these are the same places I'm going to attack, but you know, they might overlook something that a pen test person that comes from outside would want to check everything and make sure that every little gap is you know, or find any little gap that there may be, which may be overlooked by someone internally. But getting back to your original question, I definitely think that more focus needs to be put on the blue team initially, and I think it's been overlooked traditionally. Most people, when they think security, they're like, okay, we've got our firewall and we've got all this stuff, let's get a pen test to see how good we are. But although that's important, we also need to focus on the blue team stuff.
I got a good one for you, Martin. I know every time I try to place it in the conversation, but I've been told that in the very near future, we won't use blue team anymore because of AI. We'll have AI everywhere. And so we won't need any cyber defense team and blue team. What are you saying? This is a joke for the blue team.
Serge is setting me up here. He knows my view on AI. I still I mentioned before that I still think that we're quite a long way from getting you know, just AI to run our blue teams, and I certainly think that it helps, but I don't think that literally in the next 5 years, if not more, that we'll have significant overtake in terms of our blue team from human to AI. We're still going to need a lot of human interaction there. And we'll need human intelligence to actually tune our defenses. We can't rely on AI to do that. Certainly for the next 5 years, but I think potentially even longer. But you know, 5 years is a long time in technology speak. So maybe I'm proven wrong in 3 years' time. I don't know.
No, I think you're right. The main point is human intelligence, and I really like this, the way you say it and you call it. Maybe we'll have to use it later. Whatever the color or the purpose of the team, we will still rely on people and on people's skills. And this is very important for defense or an offensive perspective. You can't only rely on the tools.
I just want to add something to what you say, guys. As both of you, I do agree on the fact that we must start from the business to identify sensitive systems and major risks. But I do feel like Blue Team is part of a normal IT operational department. There is not something admin for small and low, limited resources environment. Blue Team is something, it's basics. It's just make the basic thing, like patch our systems, like close and use firewall ports, this kind of technical thing. But so this is not a particular or specific focus on that. And you have to know, what you have to do to secure more the business with some red team help. I mean, the red team will help us to identify what are the business priorities. I mean, what are the most vulnerable risk? I mean, what is exploitable by some attackers? So my answer to this question would mostly be, I would prefer implementing red teaming, an outsourced red teaming first. Why outsource? Because it is most of the time costful to have this expertise internally, but it is critical to know what it is very vulnerable to the business. So from a business perspective and from a CISO point of view, I would say I would prefer invest some money on red teaming, outsources red teaming, rather than trying to implement a heavy internal defensive system.
Yeah, I understand this point. It's very, 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 very interesting because when you fire the customer, this is what you usually hear from them. They want to do some things and else. And whenever you ask to them, what is the baseline? How much security is enough? How much security do you need? They cannot answer to those questions. So you're right. They need to have a look at what would be the security posture, what are the main assets, the most sensitive. This is a point. But what is the most important for them in terms, I mean, of dollars or euros or else? What do they want to protect? And if they don't have a baseline, it will be difficult to implement whatever to teams or apps. I take an example. You have companies, they all have firewalls, they all have system administrators and else. And when you check the configurations or you do an audit, a CIS benchmark or else, you see that they don't have the baseline or maybe a minimal requirement done on the system. So it means that they don't do auditing. For example, this is something you often say because we are too much focused on the infrastructure itself. We deploy a firewall, we put some rules, and then we try to have a team involved in the security. So these are questions, and I think your background speaks for you, and this is very good. This is why they need consultant, I mean, or outsource CISO as a service, because you bring a fresh view to them. Your interlocutors are often the IT departments. We know how we run our things because we implemented it. But they forget something behind, or they did half of the project or else. This is another point for third party or cybersecurity management of services.
Yeah, I want to chip in there as well, because I think that's a good point, and I think I would have said blue team initially just to that question, but kind of search through it out there that you know, it depends on the maturity of an organization already, and like we're all saying here, it's how good everything is already. You know, if you have great firewall engineers, if you have, you know, if you have someone thinking about patching, you know, if you have a CISO thinking about patching, then yeah, sure, red team is somewhere where you can focus on. But I guess my skepticism comes in that I've seen so many organizations that they don't do that properly. And it's, you know, I'd like to use like a technical example, you know, like if there's a poor configuration in Active Directory, you know, from a very security perspective, let's look at it from a security perspective, or let's look at, yeah, let's use Active Directory as an example. You know, where would you expect, you know, if there was a poor auditing enabled or poor password control, something that, you know, password control might be picked up by a annual audit, but you know, if you want to go beyond what the audit does, because we know audits are there just to tick a box, sometimes they don't actually secure you as much as you want, and if you want to go beyond that, you need really smart people that are running the Active Directory to, you know, to also think about security. And if you don't have that type of mentality, and you know, your AD administrators aren't, you know, they just want to make sure that Bob can log onto his computer and that the AD is up. They're not thinking about security. For me, the blue team is the guys bringing that together. And if you have a, you know, mature security team, or even an IT team that's mature and they understand security, then that will come together automatically and people will think about those questions. But I think the problem that I have is that we see that not happening in many organizations. We have the very siloed Active Directory administrator, and he's not thinking about, you know, he doesn't go take a day or a couple of hours to say, how can I make my Active Directory more secure? So in the absence of that, who's going to do that? It's not going to be the CISO, because he's not technical enough. And so this is where I'm saying that this is where I'm saying focus on the blue team. And again, I agree with you. If you have a very mature IT security, or IT or IT security, then that AD guy or someone else is going to think about how else can we make AD more secure. But if you don't have that, then you're kind of wasting your time doing the pen test first. And I think that would be a better example of. But okay, I'm gonna give you a shot there. Go for it.
Yes, exactly. The thing is, do you think the blue team will be able to identify what to fix? What are the priorities in fixing the IT environment? So what you're saying is that the blue team has to work with the CISO to get the business priorities? Is this what you're saying?
Well, for me, I see the CISO as driving the business risks. Like you mentioned earlier, it's very a risk-driven thing. And I see the blue team more driving from a technical perspective, the technical weaknesses. So not necessarily, these are the things that aren't going to have board visibility in terms of risk, or management visibility in terms of risk, like some Active Directory tick. I'll use another example. We've seen organizations deploy Office 365 and they enable basic authentication on Office 365, and they have two-factor authentication, but basic authentication can still be brute forced without two-factor authentication. And the typical AD or Office 365 administrator won't know that. Okay, if you get a pen test, you will pick up that that control is not enabled, but my view is that you want to make that more proactive. So you want to have the person that's more technical, not risk-driven. Okay, it's risk-driven, but not business risk. It's more that understands how the attacks happen. Yeah.
But on the side of Gregory, talking about the CISO and the blue team, you often see the CISO bringing the risk, and in front of this risk, blue teams comes with security controls. And this is usually when you put the risk along with the technical aspect of the job. But yes, you only rely on the skills of people. Maybe they have the skills and they know deeply how Active Directory works along with security features. I don't know how they link, but it's not usually the case, unfortunately.
Yeah, if I was to, that's a good point. I think if I was to elaborate on that, in terms of checking our internal defenses to make sure our defenses are up to scratch, we have our normal audits that you do, or you do an assessment of your firewall, or you do a PCI audit, and that's supposed to check your defenses. But again, we know that that's not 100%. So then there's actually nothing internally that's checking our defenses proactively from the blue side. We have to get the pen test side in. So I'm just saying that there's maybe benefit in doing it from the blue side, from the defensive side first. But I guess this is where the purple teaming comes into play, and you can certainly benefit if you do a pen test and then learn from where the gaps were, or if you have a red team doing that consistently, learn where the gaps are. I guess it's a different approach, if you think about it like that.
Are we saying that the team to implement first is the purple one?
Well, again, a lot of people do that because they're like, okay, we don't have budget for red and blue, so we'll get someone and it'll be purple. So we cover our things. So maybe it's just a way of thinking, and
probably
it doesn't have to be red or blue. It can be purple, but you got to look at it from both angles, I guess.
Yeah.
Gregory, do you think that the purple team is often the CISO himself?
Sure. Yes, it could be. It could be. Yes. What I feel is the CISO will be more focused on policies and risks, and while the purple team will really be an interface between IT departments or blue team and the attackers or the red team. So Yes, it really depends of the CISO. I mean, for law structures, it is interesting to have a kind of technical CISO to be helpful in these aspects. In huge companies where you have like 5 to 10 people working in IT security team, it will be okay to have dedicated purple team. But in law structures, it could be interesting to have technical CISO to handle this purple team and to animate both teams.
Yeah, I think that the thing that makes a big difference there is, like you say, is you have a very a technical CISO. Because if you don't have that, then it's purely visibility from a business risk perspective, and sometimes they may overlook if they don't have that technical background, which is okay if they have people that are there to back them up, but if not, then it becomes a challenge.
Okay, guys, time is going, and it's almost we have almost reached the end of this webinar. I wanted to check if we have some questions from the attendees. Feel free to ask questions to our panelists.
Maybe you can move on the next question till we got a question.
Yeah, I think that we have almost reached the end of the questions. So maybe it's time now to have the last word, or maybe I can try something. Would you agree if I sum up the, I would say, natural roadmap of the evolution of a security in a company with the first step is to reach a certain level of maturity with implementing technical stuff like firewalls, antivirus, and beginning to establish policies and having a CISO. Then once you have reached this level, you should do pen testing to see if everything is well set up. Then when you have this reached this second step, you could set up MDR service or a SOC service to have a more day-to-day or close eye to what's going on your security, on your networks, in a security perspective. And then the fourth and final step would be to have a red team doing his job all the time and without telling when. And that should be, I think it could be a natural roadmap of the evolution of security in a middle-sized company. What do you think about that?
Well, from my side, again, I don't know if I bother you with that, but I really come from the business perspective first, and the risk. Even if you are very small, I'm talking especially about doing pen testing earlier in your organization or not. If you have some trade secrets or receipt that you need to protect, or any specific asset, you should engage some pen testing very early, especially if you don't have the internal resources and skills to do it. This is a reflection I have toward the business itself. I'm not sure it's about a natural path for what I'm saying. But yes, as soon as you're growing, maybe you should have your internal resources to be more responsive and to be more proactive on security issues, vulnerabilities, and else. This is how I see it.
Yeah, just for me to add in there, I think that very often that is the natural progression in any case. But I would agree with Serge that in some cases, you can actually get quite a lot of benefit from a pen test early on. So, you know, setting up a blue team or maturing your organization security and setting up a red team is very time consuming. And you may need something to just check if you're on the right track. You know, are you doing the right things? How bad is the situation? And for that, a pen test is really useful because, you know, it's a short engagement. Typically, it doesn't take months. It takes a couple of days or weeks. And you get a pretty good perspective of how the security is. And then it kind of gives you a baseline of where you start working. And at that point, you might say, okay, guys, actually, our defenses are pretty good, or our patching is good. Let's focus on starting to do more regular red teaming. Or you might say, wow, we really failed badly here. We need to work on our firewall rules. Our endpoint is like Swiss cheese. We need to really work on these things. And so maybe from that perspective, it's good to put a pen test there early in that maturity life cycle or that natural cycle.
And sometimes I would add that it's a good way to have budget for your security, because showing the executives that you have plenty of vulnerabilities will allow you to gain financial budget and and do more stuff in cybersecurity.
Yeah, I think you're right. They need to see it and see that they are exposed. And they don't meet requirements to take decisions on budgets and finance.
Okay, Gregory, would you have a final word for us?
No, nothing to add. You say it all, guys. I do agree with everything, especially on the last word that Martin said, saying that a pen test early on is a good thing to start with.
Okay, so let me check if we have questions from the attendees, but unfortunately we have no question.
It's like for football, they don't want to be part of one or another team. They want to see the winner first.
Okay, I think we will stop here. It's 2:30 here, 2 p.m. So thank you very much for attending this webinar. Thank you guys for discuss this very interesting discussion about the red, the purple, and the blue teams. And see you later for the next episode of our webinar series.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Thanks everyone. Cheers.